All right. I will call the meeting to order. Wow, this is the August 8th, 2024 Lexington Planning Commission meeting. And so let's see, we're looking for an approval of the agenda.
I move to approve the agenda as presented.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
And opposed? All right, that motion carries. And now we're moving on to approval of the minutes from the July 25th, 2024 meeting. Does anybody have any comments that they want to make, any changes? They were lovely minutes, as always. Thank you.
Move approval of the minutes as presented.
I second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
And opposed? And the motion carries. Okay, and now we will open the floor up to citizens' comments on matters not on the agenda. Are there anybody in our audience would like to make a comment? Nope. Okay, so we'll close that. And then we'll go on to new business. So the first item on our agenda is ECCOA 2024-05, an application by Steve Schroeder for approval of a certificate of appropriateness for new signage for Taqueria Jalisco at 453 East Nelson Street, TM number 30-1-9, owned by Andorra Properties, LLC. Can we have a staff report, Arnie?
Good evening, everybody. We do have a property that's in the entrance corridor, and it is a sign request. So the request is for a wall sign, a window sign, and a door sign. The parcel is the first sign, which is a 90-inch by 30-inch aluminum wall sign mounted to the brick facade in the stripe above the business storefront. The second sign is an open sign that is 15.3 inches by 20.8 inches to be hung from the interior of the storefront window. And then we also have a vinyl sign that is applied to the door glass. We do have the application materials with those details. And I'll get to those in just a second as we flip over. But on the next page, on page 9 of your packet and 3 of this particular section, the signage for the applicable entrance corridor regulations. As you know, entrance corridors, we have landscaping, we have signage, and a few other standards. And in the signage in particular, I'm going to read from B there in the middle of the page. Signage, each parcel shall have an overall sign plan which reflects a consistent style and specifies the size and color scheme for the proposed signage. As you all know, we don't have an overall sign plan for this particular property, so we do the best we can when we're reviewing and approving signs. And then the second one, materials used in signs and their support structure should reflect the building served by the sign. And the last one, sign colors should be harmonious with the building which they serve. I will state that the staff does find the proposed improvements meet the zoning criteria, meaning for each of the sign types and sizes, we're within what we allow for each of those types of signs. Perhaps easiest is to, I'm sorry. I'm going to ask you to go back to page 2 of 3, which is page 8 overall of your packet. There was a miscommunication when the applicant came in, and not Steve Schroeder, who is the contractor for this particular one, but the actual restaurant owner. When they came in and applied for this entrance corridor certificate of appropriateness, they just thought incorrectly that my giving them a receipt for payment of the entrance corridor application fee, that was an approval. So they directed Steve to go ahead and put the signs up. So what you see is not a mock-up at all. Not an excellent, perfect mock-up. It's the actual signage in this case. So we see the Taqueria sign in that gray stripe that we've talked about before, because the gray stripe, as you may recall, had to be expanded a little bit to fit the pack and mail sign. So those two fit nicely within the gray stripe. We have that lighted sign that's in the window. And then on the door glass, there is a vinyl sign that was applied to the door glass. And to take you over to page 12, so you have the taqueria sign, the wall sign that is again above the front door in that gray stripe. You have some details there about colors, sizes, and the next one is my photograph of the sort of vinyl sign that was applied to the front door glass. And then the next one is a detail sort of representation of what the lighted sign is. And again, those all have been already installed. Happy to answer any questions.
Hey, does anybody have any questions for
Yes.
Arnie?
Looking at that excellent mock-up. Are those lights above the sign that are?
Those were
facing-
there.
Yeah,
Mhm.
But they were already there.
They were already existing, correct? Yes.
There were solar lights that were already in existence there.
okay.
I do have one question for you. The only thing that I wondered about was whether neon signs is there any, do we allow neon signs?
We do allow a lighted sign. I can remember that's no more than 3 square feet downtown in the C1, but internally illuminated in the C2 zoning district. And this is all C2 as we head out east of Nelson Street. Internally illuminated is permitted. There's not a maximum on area or on height. So internally illuminated signs are allowed in the entrance corridor.
Any other questions for Arnie?
Excited to eat there.
I'm sorry.
I'm excited to eat there. That's my only comment.
Okay, would you like to make a statement yourself? And if so, if you'll state your name and address for the record.
Steve Schroeder, 304 Athens Meadow, Vinton, Virginia. Excuse me. I just want to apologize to the commission, the misunderstanding with the client. I didn't mean any disrespect for the protocol or whatnot. I got the receipt. She said that was the permit and hang the sign, and I did. And then Arnie was graciously so, oh, not yet. And I just wanted to apologize. It wasn't done on purpose or out of disrespect, and it won't happen again.
Thank you. I appreciate it. And anything else that you would like to say about it or?
I think it looks good. I hope it's approved, but no, man, that's all.
Okay. Does anybody have any questions for Mr. Schroeder? No.
No.
Okay, thank you. You
Thank
can be seated.
Thanks
Thanks.
for coming.
Okay, so now I'll open the floor for public comment. Does anybody in our audience want to make a comment about this particular issue? Okay, we'll close public comment, and then now we have commission discussion and a decision, hopefully. So does anybody have anything that they want to offer? Questions, comments, concerns?
I don't, I think, as Arnie described well, our signage criteria is rather loose. And this one fits and
Yeah.
variety is okay too.
Yeah.
In terms of colors, and personally, I'm fine with.
Anyone else? Okay, well then, if nobody has any concerns, I do not have any concerns either. So if anybody, I know, it's
I'll
shocking.
move to approve entrance quarter certificate of appropriateness application EC COA 2024-05 for a new wall sign, illuminated window sign and door sign for the Taqueria
Jalisco.
lease business at 453 East Nelson Street as proposed by the applicant.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? And the motion carries. Congratulations. Thank you for coming and for the apology. I appreciate it.
Get an approval letter tomorrow.
I need to get the permit out to install it.
Otherwise, you're good.
And you're welcome to stay for the rest of our meeting, but you do not have to.
Yeah.
Oh, right. I know. It just started.
Oh, you're.
We'll drive carefully.
Preempted already, I would say.
Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah, yep.
absolutely.
Drive carefully.
Yeah.
Thank you for coming.
Thank
All right. Have a good night. All right, we'll move on to item B under new business. The zoning ordinance amendments 2024-03. We are looking at cottage housing. So Arnie, we have a staff report.
Unless you tell me any different, I'm gonna go to about 6 o'clock.
I think that that sounds about right because we're all going to get drenched on the way home and we have basements that are going to fill with water and
All the fun things.
we got to be there.
Gotta watch it come in.
Yeah.
That's right.
Don't-
That's right. You got to take
Not-
pictures of it,
Right.
post them online,
Right.
perhaps. The things that are important.
During our last discussion, we talked about density. And then we put some placeholders in for the density table. And I'm actually referring now to page 20 of your overall packet. And then you also requested some additional information, which we have in the supplement, which I'm going to go through here shortly. But after we addressed at least initially the density, then we went on to height and number of stories. But I want to jump back to density because we did provide you additional information in the supplement. So unless there are any questions, I'm going to go through the supplement pretty much line by line or at least page by page. And then maybe we can, in anticipation of hopefully getting back into the density discussion and maybe at least putting some permanent placeholders into that, well, not permanent, placeholders for now into the table on page 20. And on page 20, what we're talking about is the maximum cottage density. So that first column. Oh, and you also asked for sort of at least the some of the lot requirements for the two zoning districts that are R1 in particular. So that Kate put those two in this. So that's what's in blue, just so that you had that together. So you wouldn't have to go look at lot
And that's
requirements
helpful, yeah.
table and this table at the same time. So that's just what we currently have. R1 has for a single family dwelling with an ADU, you have 8,000 square feet minimum lot size. And then the R1 for a two family dwelling, you have 12,000 square feet. But what I'm trying to sort of highlight or point you towards is this idea of maximum cottage density. And most of these have it by a certain number of lots. So either single family multiplied by 2 lots, and then also, or by 1 cottage per so many square feet. So sort of what is your calculation or formula going to be? Is it, in our case, is it going to be the single family minimum lot size multiplied by a number of those, or is it going to be the the two family as we discussed last time? Because we had that oddity again in our R1 zoning in particular. I have to back up a half step. Most of these cottage housing development codes are doing a multiple of 2 for density based on whatever their single family lot size is. So if their single family lot size is 8,000 square feet, they're saying you can put 2 cottages or 1 cottage on 4,000 square feet or 2 cottages on 8,000. We have the oddity that we also have the 2 family dwelling that's allowed in R1 on 12,000 square feet. And we had that discussion last time. Do we do a calculation based on the single family, or do we 8,000 square feet, or do we do a calculation based on the 12,000 square feet, which is for the 2 family? All that just said is what we're trying to do is sort of focus on what is our calculation going to be for maximum cottage density, which is that second column. And then the last column, what is going to be our minimum lot size? For the most part, we have chosen 4 units as the minimum number of cottages per development because we want at least a minimum number so it makes sense. If you only have 1 or 2 sitting out in the middle of some place, it doesn't make a lot of sense for building community. And then for the maximum, we have 12, but we also added residential multifamily at the last meeting to this table. And that one we bumped up a little bit to 18 as a maximum. Again, these are placeholders. So what we're trying to sort of focus on is the maximum cottage density in the second column and the minimum lot size for whatever the minimum number of cottages will be. If I could ask you to flip over to the supplement, which begins on page 38. Actually, the 39 is probably a better place to start. So we wanted to provide you sort of a more real world example because again, we were thinking 2 times 8,000 square feet is only 16,000 square feet. What could we actually put on 16,000? Is that too small? potentially is 24,000 square feet, which is twice the two-family lot size requirement of 12,000 each. Is that the right place to start for the minimum size for 4 cottages or possibly 5, depending on how we do this? So you had asked for some examples. We reached back into the railroad cottages, which is the one in Falls Church. And then, so that's the graphic at the top there. And then we put together this table, and this table is shown multiple times. So you hopefully wouldn't have to flip back and forth too often. But just to go through the railroad cottages row, that is a parcel size that you see as 1.25 acres, which also equals 54,450 square feet. That includes 10 cottages in that development. The average cottage size is fairly large. It's 1,500 square feet. I don't remember seeing any others that allowed that large of a cottage, just to point that out. So if you divide in the 10 into the 54,000 square feet, you obviously get 5,445 square feet per cottage. Now, that's not the best metric because there's a little bit of wiggle room in there in the sense of how much open space do they have, how many parking spaces, how oddly configured is the parcel. This one has a point at the end, which is really not usable. And then also, does it not include a common house or a common building? So just general comparisons here. And that equals an overall density of 8 dwelling units per acre. And then in that last column, what I was trying to sort of convey is if we use the minimum number of cottages, how many would that actually, what would that equate to, since we have 4 as the minimum that we're thinking of? So this number is between the 16,000 that we were going to potentially do twice the single family in R1 and 24,000, which is twice the 2 family, if that makes any sense. So I'm just trying to give you sort of an idea of, in a real world example, what would 4 cottages have required roughly, again, because it's hard to parse out exactly, in this railroad cottages development for Falls Church. So that fell about 21,000 square feet.
That is helpful. So that includes parking in open area.
That's just
Yeah, so that's good.
a
Okay.
very gross calculation.
Yeah. Yeah, in the common building, right.
Any questions about what we're trying to convey in this table, and hopefully it's helpful to you as we're talking about minimum lot size and also how we're going to ultimately calculate density.
Yeah, I really like that last column. That's very helpful. Just sort of apples to apples.
Yep.
Makes it a lot easier.
And I can't recall if there's anything. Well, let's flip over to the next page. There's nothing else in the design, but we flip over the next page, which is page 40. And again, I think this is helpful just to show single family dwellings on fairly large lots. And then all of a sudden, these 1,500 square foot cottages, there is a fairly stark difference between the two of them. But in this particular case, also to point out, it's also a nice transition because we're going from the single family to this denser single family. And then what would have been a railroad has now been converted from from rails to trails. So there's a trail there, and on the other side, there's more of a sort of a light industrial district. So yes, there's a stark comparison between the single family that you see in this suburban sort of layout and the cottages, but it is also a nice transition to what else is across what used to be the railroad track.
How large are we thinking these houses are? And these are single family homes. They're huge.
Mm-hmm. You can definitely see the older ones, more story and a half, dormers, what would have been I presume the original houses. And then there was probably a little bit of or significant remodeling or even scraping and rebuilding. It's hard to tell from this graphic, but yes, if you compare the 1,500 square foot cottages to some of those footprints, yes, they're quite big.
And as you noted, Arnie, 1,500 square feet is a good size.
Mhm.
Also, I mean, that's a 3-bedroom.
Right.
Yep.
And do we know if these are 1,500 square feet?
Yes,
They are definitely.
from what I recall, they were allowed. And now I pulled it from a news article that said they averaged 1,500. So
Sorry, was that 1,500 square feet footprint or was that
Total.
like total? So both floors included. So,
That's what
okay,
I recall, yes.
that's why they look so small.
Mhm. There are no other questions on the railroad. Oh, on the railroad cottages, if we flip over to page 41 and talk about Third Street cottages. These are in Langley, 2/3 of an acre, about 28,000 square feet per the entire parcel. 8 cottages, their average size was 850 square feet. So that gets you about 3,600 square feet per cottage at a 12 dwelling units per acre. And if you just divided the 4 cottages into that 12.12 dwelling units, you get 14,376 square feet if you were to start just with 4 cottages.
And this was this the one that had the very complicated formula for how they were allowed to do that second floor? Like it couldn't be more than or less than.
I think so.
Yeah.
It was, yeah, I believe you're correct. I can probably pull it up if you need it, but it would
It
take
just,
a minute.
yeah, it just looks like that would,
Yeah.
in order to get this.
They were definitely
they
at a
would
story and
have
a half
Yeah.
and yeah. And then on the next page, just an aerial view, and you can sort of tell by the different lots left and right, particularly the lot is 2 over to the right, that there were be 4 lots, 4 single family lots in this particular development ended up being placed on top of those 4 single family lots and doubling that density size. Now, also just quick calculation on here, because this overall lot that's outlined in yellow is 120 feet by 240 feet. And I didn't include this for you in your packet. I did this afternoon. So if you just bear with me, that's a total lot area of 28,800. So if you divided that in half, that's 14,400 again. Just to give you a sense of between 16,000 and 24,000, what would our minimum size potentially be? And if we could put 4 cottages, if you just have that either lengthwise or crosswise, that gets you 14,400 square feet, just as an example. Because I think part of the question was, what can we fit 4 cottages on comfortably on 16,000 square feet, or do we need 24,000 square feet? So this is a fairly decent example of it. 14,400 is half the lot size. And if you sort of divided it during lengthwise, you can see 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 cottages on the right-hand side. Of course, that's not completely fair because it doesn't include the parking. It doesn't include some of the open space. But I think you could possibly come to the conclusion that 4 cottages, if they're only 850 some square feet, if that's what we sort of max out, then perhaps they could fit comfortably on 16,000 square feet or so, give or take.
Depending on the open space and the parking requirements and
Still more to consider, yes.
yeah.
If there are no questions there, I want to ask you to go over to page 43. These are the 2 parcels owned by Max Ivankoff at 206 Walker Street. There's the smaller parcel, which is about 6,250 square feet, and the larger parcel, which is about 24,000 and some square feet. So Houston Street, he had 3 different concepts here. All of them are at 0.74 acres. The first one I'm just going to go through had 10 cottages, and that equaled 12,907 square feet for 4 cottages in that particular layout. And then Max had some other options. One that's up to 14,000 square feet for when he had 9, and then 11,000 for when he had a layout of 11. Again, it's not exactly apples to apples because Max didn't include a common building as an example. And we also, as Jen just pointed out, we don't have yet the calculation for open space per cottage. So there's still some work that needs to be done on that side. Well, please interrupt me as you see fit. On page 44 is just one of the examples and the sort of plan view, and then more of the, I don't know what you call this, more of the 3D view, if you will, just to show one of the concepts. And then if there are no questions, I'm gonna ask you to flip over to page 46.
So does this accommodate all of the parking? And is the street parking included in the parking that,
If we're on page 44.
Yeah.
And we have 9 units, so we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16. So
so was the on-street parking included in the,
he was included in this concept. He was utilizing that for his, now it's hard to tell here if, no, actually, it's not hard to tell here. It's on-street parking that would presumably he would ask to count towards his parking. We don't know what the parking requirement is currently, but that those are 5 lots shown on the Walker Street side in this particular schematic.
and is that distance, I just, I go on this road every day. I'm am well aware of how bad this particular corner is. If somebody is trying to park there, that seems like it could be quite
Mhm.
dangerous. Particularly with people turning from Houston left onto Walker Street.
Mhm.
If you've got somebody backed up and backing up and people are just sometimes faster than they should be driving. Is this the typical distance?
You mean that setback from the corner?
Yeah.
I can't answer that typical distance simply because downtown, as an example, where people are going generally slower, there's not even, people can park pretty much up to the corner, except for crosswalks might set the parking back a little bit. I will offer also that we currently don't allow on-street parking to count towards your off-street parking requirement.
Right.
So this wouldn't, as it's shown now in the rough schematic, count towards whatever his parking requirement will be.
And this was the concept that brought up the issue of, do you want your courtyard secluded or
Mhm.
open like that too? Because you probably couldn't fit as many houses if you do it.
Then we have the oddity of the one parking space that's over on Houston Street all on its own, just a single one. It's,
Aren't there
Yeah.
other plans that have no street parking?
I,
on this
I've
concept?
got them and I can look if I don't recall if I think
Or maybe like
A-
minimal. I lived in a condo in Colorado and parking is a hot commodity. And I imagine that's going to cause a lot of issues with people parking there that are not supposed to be parking there.
True, that's a good point.
Hmm.
That how would he, if he wants it to be utilized only for his own, then how is he going to control that? It's on public, so we're going to have to control it. And do we really want to? So that might just be an example of we probably shouldn't allow on-street parking to count for off-street parking requirements.
Yeah.
Anything else with that particular concept? And sorry, we also have all the other, Kate's done a great job. If you wanted to go and look back at one of your older staff
I remember seeing the
reports.
other concepts. Yeah. Like
And I think
I-
you're right that it wasn't
there's some
on.
that have it laid out a little bit differently. Like I like the one that is more secluded. I like living in a place like this. It was nice to have our space that was just our space and it wasn't
Defined
the public
as.
space. Yeah.
Mhm.
So I don't, if I was the person choosing this, I would not like the open concept to like the public. I would like the courtyard to be like more closed off personally, but I understand like the beautification, but if you're paying for it and they're likely going to be HOA that's paying for the maintenance of it, they would probably want it to be their own.
These are all, I'm so thankful that we have actual examples to pull from. So we have these discussions and then could
So
fold that into our code as needed.
Arnie, a question, because I don't want to, I don't think we should pick this particular one apart because but it's a good example. What would be the minimum parking requirement? Do we have that yet?
We haven't
I mean,
gotten
if
to
we
that
have
yet,
9
but-
units, what would it be?
Oh, what were we talking about? 1.25 or something along those lines, I think is what we had from other.
Yeah, from others, yeah.
It's been a little while since we've talked about the parking going through, but I think that's roughly where others were. And I think we've had some discussions where some folks are thinking, well, we needed a little bit more than that. And so we don't have transit necessarily. So can you go down to only one per? And also it's going to be heavily dependent on size of unit.
Mhm.
If you have a 1,500 square foot unit, you're probably going to want to do more than 1 or 1.25 spaces per unit. But if you're only doing 850 square feet, how many people can you fit in that? If it's going to be targeted towards singles and maybe retired couples, then they're probably only going to have one car potentially, and hopefully a nice bike. So it's going to be dependent also on some other factors.
Mhm.
Anything else on that one?
No, actually, just to comment on he was probably listening to our discussion because we did talk about on this issue of opening up the front. It's like either you make it you don't want it to have a gated community look. You want it to have an open, the public can see it. And it reminds me in some ways of the U shape is what you see in a lot of the old style garden apartments where, it's a U shape and because it's a semi-private public space, you're not going to walk in there, but at least it's more open to the outside. So those are the trade-offs in that discussion.
Right, open to, but it's less inviting to sit in as a resident.
But that could be handled by,
Larger plantings.
but anyway, we're not critiquing
Yep,
an
yep.
individual plant.
No, we're not.
All right, if we're done with that, over on page 46, just threw it in as an example. And then today I realized my calculation is just wrong. So this is 201 North Randolph Street. The two properties were the large house on North Randolph Street, burned in 2016 and was more recently removed, demolished and removed from the property. But my calculation is wrong there. Have listed the parcel size as 0.58 acres in size based on what the GIS tells you. If you click on each of the two parcels, they tell you that one parcel is 0.42 and the other one's 0.16. That's not true. It's actually 0.81 total. So that's just incorrect. So then also doing a little bit additional thinking initially that the 201 North Randolph Street and the 3rd Street cottages in Langley are pretty close in size. So one is 0.66 and the other one's 0.81. So if we took the same number of units, 8 cottages that we had in 3rd Street cottages, and put that into the 201 North Randolph Street, which is 35,000 square feet, what will we get? We would get a square foot per cottage of 4,406 square feet in size. And then in the last column, it would be 17,600 square feet for 4 cottages. So just because those were close in size, I think I've mentioned that before, just trying to overlay what the layout for the 3rd Street cottages would be on the 201 North Randolph Street, because it's also very similar in shape in that we have about 140 feet on the short side and 250 feet on the long side. If there are no questions there, over on page 47, this is the Ross Chapin design that was done for Thornhill Road. And on the Thornhill Road site, it's 1.37 acres, which is about 59,000 square feet, 8 cottages there. And then going all the way over to the last column, it would be about 30,000 square feet for a minimum of 4 cottages. It is a larger parcel. And some of these, the question marks on the average size of the cottages that's just not known. It wasn't plugged in. Those are concepts, so we didn't know what the average size of the cottages were. So that was and the next page just gives you the outline of that particular parcel and gives you a better sense of where it's located. So that's what we were trying to accomplish with this density table and the supplement. I don't know if it helps you at all as you think about your overall density and how you're going to calculate that, and also sort of the minimum lot size that's needed for a cottage development, of course, depending on what zoning district we're talking about. And then, because we also talked about height a little bit at the last meeting, and in particular stories, several of these are very traditional. It will look like a traditional Northwest cottage and only be 1.5 stories in height. Now, I may not have been as clear as perhaps I could have been, so try to find a couple of examples. The one on page 49 is a 2-story cottage. And that upper bedroom that you see in the right-hand photograph is a full 8-foot wall, presumably. And then it has a vaulted ceiling above that. So that would not be a 1/2 story. That would be a full story. So that's a 2-story cottage. It's also a good example that we haven't quite decided, but it was mentioned. If we do 2 stories, we might want to limit the upper floor to a smaller number by proportion or by square foot than what's allowed on a larger bottom. So that is just an example of that, but that hasn't been decided yet. But again, that's an example. On the last page, which is page 50 of your packet, that is a true 1.5 story cottage. Excuse me, in the bedroom that you see in the photograph there, it has a knee wall of approximately 3 feet in height. So the knee wall only comes up to a certain amount. Our half story is 5 feet, and then it goes up to a peak. So that is a 1.5 story. Any questions from the supplement? If not, I guess we can go back to the density section. See if we can't put some more placeholders in the table that's located on page 20 of your packet.
I have a question. Has there been any, like, housing is an issue in Lexington? Has there been discussion with like threshold or like, it feels difficult to be like, oh, that house doesn't seem big enough or small enough when like people would just be happy to have a house.
Yeah, but I don't know how to address that.
Know what I'm
Yes,
saying?
but we're trying to address some of that by doing this.
Okay.
So just the fact that, zoning is so standardized and we require a fairly decent lot size for a single family. And so we're now utilizing our zoning code to have some options. So this is a potential option for roughly doubling the density and also providing a smaller unit than people may have available to them out in the regular market with regular houses for whatever that's worth.
Mhm.
But I'm not sure I've answered your question as far as input from other groups.
I'm curious if there, if, right, I think it's probably a bigger question, right? And it's nuanced. I know there's that housing is an issue, that there's, unhoused people and like, I don't think they would be like, like the more we can get, the better, obviously, the more housing, but at the same time, like, keeping with the, how the town looks and how all this stuff looks. So I mostly am just like, is this a solution or is this one solution or one potential partial solution to the housing issue?
Housing issue as far as number of units, yes. As far as hopefully the cost of units, yes, because these are smaller, so hopefully they'll be a little bit more affordable. The unhoused thing, unless we have a not-for-profit of some sort that comes in and does one of these for unhoused folks, I'm not sure it's going to necessarily address unhoused.
Right, right. No, that makes sense. Yeah. Okay.
But it is a tool for a developer, and it'll be up to the developer really to decide who their target market is. And it will help somebody who wants to do more affordable housing because we're setting the maximum sizes. They can build, smaller houses if that's the market they're targeting. But like Arnie said, I think we're giving a tool to the community. It's kind of up to the developer to figure out who they're marketing to. But you're right. I mean, we definitely need housing of every type, and we need affordable housing is one of the things.
Right. Like seeing someone, like I come from Colorado, like houses are small. They're all really close to, like,
Yeah.
there's a lot of stuff, and like even seeing the railroad, like seeing it next to those other houses that have so much land, which land is important to some people, but others just want a house, right? And so it feels, it's interesting to be having this discussion, but also I just want to keep in mind that housing is an issue and that obviously the more we can allow for, the better, just to try to work with that issue, I guess.
This isn't zoning, but just to make you aware also, and everyone else, that we're not doing it. The Central Shenandoah Planning District Commission is working on a regional-wide housing study right now, and it should be finished any day. I told you that at the last meeting, and it still hasn't been finalized, but we should get that any day to give us more detail on what our issues are for housing
Great.
here, the county, BV, and also regionally. And then the other thing that we're working on is a housing windshield survey for housing conditions, which is a completely different type of project, but we do have some housing initiatives.
They like collect based off of, like, how do they collect that information?
They're gonna drive by or walk by and stand on the public way or drive by the public way and have a score sheet, and then this house is in great condition, looking at windows, trim, roofing, all that type of thing. And then also, or it's in bad condition, score it from 1 to 5 and provide us with a map that shows us where our areas of concern may be. And then when we have a better understanding of that is, then we can figure out how to potentially address that through a number of programs, either we develop locally or utilize from the state, from DHCD, Department of Community Housing and Community Development.
Thank you all.
No, it's a great question. That's why I mean, just the other point to add to what Arnie is saying is we are landlocked and we don't have much developable land. So that's why we've been going through these rezoning ideas where this is one method to increase the density just to get more and smaller units, which could serve both ends of the housing market, people who want to get into it and those who want to downsize. And then the zoning that we did last year on mixed use in the C2 zone areas are for a much higher density, which would be for the apartment style. So that's what we're trying to do, is show these, start to have these different kinds of zoning that allow more housing. And then on the affordable side, you're absolutely right in that, some of this can actually help. If there was a not-for-profit that went ahead and did some affordable housing, these are tools for them to use. Well, it's a great question. That's why we're here.
Yeah.
And let us not forget ADUs,
Right.
which are another solution that we spent a lot of time working on. And so that's another option for smaller, less expensive housing. And we do have Habitat. They're going to be starting. I don't know when. I don't know. Maybe you do.
About a year or so out before they started on the 7 houses on Lions Court.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
I saw a sign, it's like near that gas station, right?
On
Yeah, I
South
saw a
Main.
sign like
Yes.
future habitat, yeah.
Right.
Okay,
Exactly.
perfect.
So yeah, I think there's a multi-pronged approach to addressing housing, but there are some other underlying issues, which I don't know whether you're aware of. How long have you lived here?
A little over 3 years.
Okay, so you're well aware probably of the students and and alumni buying up houses for their students or just to come and visit their students.
I was
So they're
just
right, they're,
complaining about that. So
right.
yes,
So
my-
there are all sorts of reasons why housing is complicated.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. My wife just graduated from the law school. So yeah, there's people that come, they buy a house and then they leave it for rent, which
Right.
is helpful, but also not helpful. Like for renters, it's helpful. But yeah. Okay. Thank you for answering my questions. I appreciate it.
who wants to volunteer a formula for R1 cottages, maximum cottage density?
I did play around with it earlier. One suggestion, and you'll get a little bit larger of a minimum requirement, but it's just the minimum requirement. And I think if you scale up, you could get more houses in, but was to take, like you used in your chart, I used 5 houses and the minimum, the square foot per house, and then multiplied it by 1.3, because I just think we need to include open space. Make sure that they include that in there, because if we just say we're going to base our minimum on the required area for houses, we're not going to get the parking and the open space in there, and people are going to start looking at lots they can't really put even 4 houses on. And so when using that, I wound up with just a little bit larger than what we're looking at. So for R1, a minimum of 20,800 square feet, which is, if you're like me and thinking acres, it's 0.47 acres in R1. And R2 would end up being 39,000 square feet or 0.9 acres. And that'd be the minimum where you start, and you can work from there. But you could put, if you're building 8 houses, you wouldn't necessarily double that number to get 8 houses. That's just the minimum you need to get started to ensure that you have open space and adequate room for parking.
I wonder, I mean, so I wonder if it makes sense to, in order to protect that open space, if it makes sense for us to start with what is the footprint of the house and then how much open space do we want per house?
Right.
Plus how much parking do we need per house? And then, so add those all up and say, that's the actual minimum per house you need.
I was doing that for the lot, for 4 houses.
Yeah,
To
for-
get your minimum.
But that, but did,
but
what, so what numbers
I
did you
made an
have?
assumption of parking would equal one more of your lot sizes, your cottage, square foot per cottage amount. And then I used 0.3, 30% open space.
Okay.
So the parking's probably a little light and that'll cut into your open space, but just to, as a starting point, that's what I used.
Mm-hmm.
And just to be clear, that was for a minimum of 5 cottages.
4.
Four.
I added a 5th house in only to kind of equate to parking, but that's probably not enough space to equate for parking for 4 houses.
The number, the square foot number for R1, you said. Okay.
Yeah, square foot was 20,800 feet squared. And R2 was 39,000 square
Leslie,
feet.
can-
But
can-
going along, just if we could come up with that formula, I think it's just what you said, Shannon, just figuring out our numbers. I just started
Yeah.
with those numbers, kind of going blind, just making a best
Well,
guess.
right,
Well-
but that's, yeah, that makes sense.
Could you just do me a favor, and because I want to make sure I'm clear,
Yeah.
just walk it through again
Sure.
on the R1 as an example.
So we said the cottages were going to be 3,200 square feet.
Uh-huh.
And so I'd say I used 5 cottages, assuming one was really for parking, would take up the area required for parking for
Okay,
your 4
okay,
cottages.
Now I
So
understand.
that gave the 16,000, and then I just multiplied, which was the number we already have as a placeholder, but then I just multiplied that by 1.3, made the assumption on 30% open space,
Okay.
just as a starting point. And so that's where I ended up with the 20,800 square feet.
Okay, thank you. That's helpful.
But that would give you 30% open space in addition to whatever amount of open space was baked into the 3,200 square feet per cottage.
Right.
Initial calculations, right? So it would be more than 30% square feet open space, right?
Depending, yes. So on whatever we figure out for your cottage side, right. Whatever we figure out that is your maximum footprint
Right.
and how much you want for each little house to have, but then we have we have to have some
That's
common
right.
open space too.
Right.
And then is there also a common building? Like, are we requiring or recommending, or is the common building up to the builder?
Yeah, I don't think we should require it personally. I think it's up to the builder.
Okay, okay, so you wouldn't have to build that number in, but you definitely would have to build in I mean, I really sort of feel like we need to have those numbers to get us starting, you know, so
Right.
what's the footprint
Right.
of the building first?
Yeah.
And then how much open space, like public open space, do we want for the whole unit or per house? And then how much open space or yard, like private yard, does each house get? So does anybody have any thoughts on square footage, square footage, not both first and second floor if there's a second floor, but actual footprint of the house? I know that what
Mm.
was it, 850 was
Well,
That was 1.5 story. So I'd have to go back and see what the maximum was for the first floor and then how they calculated the second half floor.
Isn't that partially determined by if we say they can do 1.5 story or 2 story? Because
no, the footprint would be
Footprint
just
would be the-
just what's on the ground.
that's what's confusing.
but if we allow for a 2 story, then there could potentially be less on the bottom.
Well, they could, but we're just talking about the maximum
right.
footprint. So if, like, let's say it's 800 square feet. is the maximum. They could still do 750 and have whatever else up top. And that'll be determined a little bit by whether we allow a whole second floor or a half second floor or a half floor, half story.
I was just gonna say, and we determined early on that we were going for double density. And so that's where that, 3,200 square feet came up for R1. Just know if we reduce that number, we're increasing the density, which I don't know if is good or bad. Yeah, I'm
Right.
Yeah.
Well, I think if we start it at least with numbers, we could, and then if it doesn't work out, then we can sort of say, okay, we need to readjust this. But
If I could just offer, I know this is hard because we're trying to figure out minimum lot size. So we're trying to overall, but we don't yet know the pieces on square footages and other things that you've just mentioned. But if we can at least park some numbers in here, and then as we're going, because we don't have all of that additional information for you this evening, and I'm also running out of time. So if we could maybe just park some numbers, be mindful of this conversation as we've had on other conversations as we're going forward, and then we can look back after we've parked some numbers here and then made some decisions further down the line. So when you do the review, that's when we'll make it work a little bit better.
Yeah, and the other part is, it's not just for all of us to have a common understanding, but when this goes out to
Yeah.
council and public, that it's clear. So,
yep.
I think that'll be important. What would be our normal way of, and even in the code of measuring density? We use dwelling units per acre, but
That's the problem with our code.
yeah,
Your lot requirements table, just as an example.
yeah,
So we, for R1, have 8,000 square foot as a minimum lot size for a single family. To get a little bit more complicated, let's have some fun in RM. RM, you would think, oh, how many apartments can we have per acre? We don't do that. So for a multifamily, minimum lot area, 10,000 square feet plus 1,500 square feet for each unit in excess of 4. So it requires math. So it's not as easy as saying gross density or net density per acre. You have to have at least 10,000 square feet for 4 units, and then 1,500 square feet for each unit above that. So, but I don't know if the 1,500 helps you at all in their current discussion. Even townhouse is completely different than a detached cottage, but it's another number.
But we do have a density number for R1 and R2, at least a starting point, the minimum square
Yeah.
footage
The
requirement.
lot requirement
Lot
itself, yes.
Do we have a maximum square footage footprint for houses in single family?
No, we do not have a
Maximum?
minimum house size, nor do we have a maximum.
So if I had an
Except for the-
8,000 square foot lot, with exception for the setbacks.
Yeah,
So I could have a very big house
Mhm.
so that we don't have any open space requirements.
no, just setbacks,
Right, just setbacks,
which is
which are minimal. I mean, if you thought about putting a ginormous house, I mean, you could have, what is it, 10 feet from the sides, 5 feet from the back, and
well, 25
feet.
feet from the back, because it's a accessory structure like a shed could go as close as
Okay.
5. But in
But the-
R1, it's 15 feet in the front, 10 feet on the sides, and 25 feet in the back for a main structure. And then also up to 35 feet in height, plus up to 45 feet if you had a little bit extra side yard. So to your point, yes, you could get a fairly decent sized house on an R1 lot.
Mhm.
I might do a little math. And
Well,
I'm curious now,
Yeah.
like
We've
how
had
big
that
of a
debate
house?
here, haven't we? I mean, whether we're using the setbacks as the way to minimize it's a way to control the density or the size of the house. Anyway,
This is
But in this case, we do, for a regular house, our open space requirement is just the setbacks, but
Yeah.
this is different because we're saying it has to have a common courtyard area So we do need to put an actual
Sure.
number in there.
So I'm-
So you're looking for a number, a placeholder number.
It's almost like which number do you want to start with? Right? That's kind of what your point was before, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because if you start one end to start with is the minimum lot size and to try to make some guesstimates about how much you need times cottages to get there. And I liked your strategy for thinking about it. It makes a lot of sense to me.
Yeah, I do
With,
too.
but then of course, whether we're getting the multiplier right there very much depends on the average size of the cottages.
Right.
Mhm.
Right. And especially because we still want to keep on screen the sort of flexibility. We don't want to design this so stringently that there's few opportunities for anybody to take it up.
Exactly.
That's not a very helpful comment, but just trying to put
No.
the challenges we're facing on screen there.
Yeah.
Right. So you were suggesting start with penciling in an average cottage size.
Yeah.
Right. And then from there, like is 1.3 the right multiplier given the number we select for that? Right. Because if it's 850 feet per cottage versus 1,500, right? Am I making sense?
Yeah.
But I mean, what I love about the staff report today is that we can look at these designs, right? And we can look at them and we can see like what's the density and the number of cottages and the cottage sizes in them. And so it gives us other way of coming at it, complementary way of coming at it, say, do we like that design? Like, do we want to write the rules in a way that would facilitate the construction of something like that?
Right.
Does that make sense?
It does.
I'll stop talking.
No.
No, that's all
That
good
was helpful.
points.
If the formula of 1.3 is something we could apply, that's at least a starting point. And then you can, within that, you could also have minimum size units and maximum size units. I think that's very, very easy to conceive and run with.
With your permission, we'll go ahead and put in for R1 and R2 what Leslie had proposed. We'll leave RLC and maybe RM open for now. And again, these are just placeholders. And then we'll come back to it after we figure out some more of the details, minimum cottage size, bottom floor, top floor, open space, and the footprint and all those other things. Maybe it's just easier just to leave this part of this blank and then just come back to it.
Okay.
That's what, footprint size is actually easier to talk about than square footage, and then we can decide if we're gonna do 1.5 or 2 stories and keep the second story smaller.
I can't remember how much further. Sides lot, coverage a lot. It's a little bit further down the line, but we'll get there.
So-
Can we move it around so that we deal with
Yeah,
that sooner?
I'm just following just because it's easier front to back, but if you want to jump around some, we can certainly do that as well.
I think that that's gonna be just in terms of starting with a number and we all know sort of what size house we live in. And so it's very much more concrete.
Yeah.
So we start with the house, then we think, okay, how much open, then we think, okay, well, how much parking literally, and then there has to be some space for driving around and getting in and out of your parking space. So we can sort of get to that minimum feasible size. And this was one of those issues that was, I've forgotten which, maybe the one in Washington, was it?
Yeah.
That had no, it was Winchester, where the numbers didn't add up. And we want to avoid that. And I think this might help us get to numbers that will work.
Okay, so it sounds like for the next meeting, we won't be talking about sort of trim details and whatnot, and we're going to skip over to cottage floor area, which
Yeah.
on this particular is
Okay.
page 29.
Yeah.
So cottage floor area to nail that down. And then what would be helpful after that to get into the building setbacks or common open space? So just sort of pick up from there, which is
Yes, I would say let's get the spatial of the numbers of the
Figured
layout
out.
figured out. And then we can deal with the, what do they have to build it out of questions.
That makes sense. I mean, it's almost like we're building it from the ground up. That you're gonna have a footprint, porch,
Right.
parking space.
Right.
And then the multiplier, I think it's a good idea that Leslie's given. And the question is whether you're using 1.25 or 1.3 or.
What it is, you know.
Right.
Because I mean, we want to make it simple. Can I get a sense in rereading this stay? And I know we have good, healthy debates and discussions on this. The Winchester one is really detailed,
Yes.
really detailed.
Do you think too detailed?
I wonder. I wonder.
Yeah, well, I mean, we're not completely following Winchester though, right? Right. I think one of the things that we talked about was liking the having the objective in each section.
Oh, yeah, no, that's fine.
And
That's
that's fine. I mean, yeah, I see the value certainly in clarity, but also succinct clarity. As
I think
opposed
that's
to,
why we chose Winchester, was because it had all the detail in it. It's easier to sort of jettison what we don't need than to potentially miss something that we don't know about in project or a type of housing that we're not familiar with.
right.
Thank you, Arnie
Yes,
and Kate,
thank
for
you.
all the work on that.
We'll pick
All
up
right.
with cottage sizes at the next time.
Cottage sizes next, yeah. All right, well, it looks like we're gonna open up for public comment next. Does anybody in the audience want to make a public comment about this issue before we close it out? Okay, we're gonna close public comment and go on to other business. Arnie, do you have a zoning and planning report for us?
Not.
Okay,
Oh, can I ask well, since we're in other business, welcome, Krista. Sorry,
Yes.
really officially. We
yes.
just put you right into the fire and you did great.
Yeah, you did.
You did, well done. Sorry,
Thank you.
that was on my list.
Thank you. No, it's all good. Thank you.
And for our next meeting, there's a CUP,
There's
and I can't remember if Jeremy's already given guidance on, for those of us who have,
conflicts.
yes,
Yeah.
right.
We will pass around. Oh, yeah, true. I forgot that we didn't want him to review it every time. Yeah,
Yeah, right.
thank you for the reminder.
Two CUPs, there was the one for the
Oh.
courthouse. Oh, that's right, yes.
So the courthouse is coming back. Decision has finally been made from the owner applicant, and then he has a new one across the street.
And can I ask a question on the courthouse, not at the courthouse, on the Rockbridge building? Will the first floor be retail? Okay, that was the question people had asked. Yeah.
Yeah.
Two retail spaces still remaining on most of that first floor. There's an addition off the back. The retail doesn't reach into the addition, but there's still two retail spaces on the main floor.
Great, thanks.
Okay, and
Can I just make one point on welcoming
of
Krista?
course.
When I first met her, she knew I was on the planning commission and she said, I love the comprehensive plan.
You were made for
I've been
this.
going through it like page by page, like looking at the like initiatives, the X year plans. Like, yeah, I love it. It's very beautiful.
So-
Makes sense that you want an award for it.
A
Wonderful.
little,
Yeah.
Well, welcome, Krista. Lovely to have you. And I assume we have no updates on the key annual PC milestones. And city council report.
Well, city council did not have a regular meeting last Thursday, but we did have a work session. And we talked about the city hall renovation and a police grant, and those were very well covered in the newspaper if you want more details. But for our coming up meeting, we will do the batch of zoning amendments. So that'll, the zoning amendment, all those issues will be in there. That's all I have.
Thank you. All right, and that's all that's on the agenda.
I move to adjourn this most wonderful session.
I second.
All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? Don't say it.
Anyone ever opposed? Anyone